I live in a really small countryside town. The population's only a few thousand, and the nearest city is a couple hours away. Most of the people that live here are quite close. With there being so few people around, everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew everything that was going on in town as well. At the time, I was in high school and had a best friend named Chris that I'd hang out with pretty much every day. During mid-fall, there was a lot of talk about this empty farmhouse in the town that people were keen on exploring. I was never one to do those sorts of things, but Chris was, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't the least bit curious. Supposedly, this farmhouse had been left behind by the owners years ago. Left to rot on the edge of town for the past 5 years. Being in high school, the rumors of it spread like wildfire. People were telling stories about it, daring others to explore it. It was on one weekend night that Chris brought it up to me as well. We had nothing else to do really, and Chris seemed really excited to see what everyone was talking about. After finding a couple flashlights, we got in the car and drove to the farmhouse. We only knew which road it was on, but it wasn't very hard to find from the road. You could see the rotting house in the distance. We couldn't find the driveway up to it though. It was likely it had long since been overgrown, might not even exist anymore. We parked on the road and started walking through the field towards this house. It was almost 1 a.m., so the moon was lighting up the field just enough for us to navigate through. As we got closer, it almost felt like the night got quieter and quieter around us until we reached its area. The house had weeds infesting the whole yard, and vines growing through the wooden panels on the outside. Chris led the way, walking around to the front where the door was missing. That gave us easy enough access inside. We stepped in and started walking through the rooms, looking at the trash on the ground and the decaying interior. It made both of us wonder why it had been abandoned to begin with. After a minute or two, though, we'd seen everything on the first floor. We moved up to the second. It was much darker upstairs. There were no windows to let in the moonlight. We both turned on our flashlights and shined them around. There were only 2 rooms up there, one on the left side of the hallway and the other on the right side. Chris went up to the left, finding that the door was locked. While he was struggling with that door, I went over to the other room. It happened to be unlocked. It was entirely empty, having mold covering the ceiling and nothing more. There was a single window with slabs of wood nailed across it. Curious, I went up to it. Why would they need to block an upstairs window? I crouched down to investigate and looked in between the 2 slabs to see what was outside. Maybe it had access to the roof or something. It didn't though. This was just an ordinary window facing the field we'd come from. As I looked out into the moonlit grass, I saw a figure walking toward the farmhouse, not too far away. I left the window and whispered to Chris that someone was coming. My heartbeat was already speeding up. I think it was seeing the figure being all alone that really freaked me out though. Knowing this was not another group of kids just exploring this place. Chris looked nervous too. He walked over to the window to see for himself, but we immediately stopped at the sound of footsteps entering the house downstairs. We froze in place, standing in the middle of the empty room, too scared to even take a step and risk being found. The person walked slowly through the first floor, going to the stairs and beginning to walk up. Both Chris and I stared at the open doorway, listening as the footsteps approached the top. They started coming even closer until the large figure of a man appeared in front of us. He was facing the other way, unlocking the locked door. As he stood in that dark hallway just 4 or 5 feet away from us, I held my breath in my hands, hoping he would not turn around. When he opened the door, I immediately locked eyes with another man who had been waiting inside that room. Our gaze was broken as the man went into the room and closed the door behind him. We heard them whispering immediately after. Chris and I made our move, sprinting into the hallway and down the stairs. We heard the door swing open and footsteps charging out behind us. We fled the house and ran for the field. We didn't stop until we got to the car, driving away as fast as we could. The whole ride back to my house, neither of us said a single word. We were both just in shock, taking everything in. We had no idea what was going on in that house or who those men were, but out of fear of getting in trouble for trespassing, we did not call the police. We were stupid to have even gone there in the first place. I won't defend any of my actions, but I feel like there was something more sinister going on at that farmhouse. A month after that incident, the house was bought and torn down with no reason given. Whether or not something was really going on in there, we'll never be able to find out now, that's for sure. This happened just a few months ago. I went to a park to work out with my friend Mikey. There's a park not too far away from where we live, and it has everything basically. There's a baseball field, basketball courts, a big playground. There's also picnic tables and several grassy areas as well. Overall, it's really big. Sometimes I go there with my friends to play basketball or do whatever we feel like, really. On this day, Mikey and I were doing some conditioning in the park. We both play sports and are there all the time. It was a little bit later on this night though, right around sunset or so. The park did have some lights, but after sunset it would get pretty quiet around there. By this time, most of the people had left already. There were a few others milling about here and there spread out, but not that many. The park also had 2 parking lots, one on each end of it. Mikey and I had been running in one of the large grassy areas where there wasn't really anybody else around. When we left, we walked all the way back to the parking lot and got into my car. It was sort of a long walk, and after getting back, I realized I didn't have my phone. I also didn't know where it was. I soon figured out that I likely forgot it where we had been at the park. We would always set our stuff down when we worked out, and obviously I would not be running with my phone in my pocket. We got back out of my car and started walking back over to see if I'd left it somewhere in the grass. Now a long distance away, near where we had been, I saw this guy walking. I assumed he was just a random man passing by. But then the guy looked at the ground near where Mikey and I had been. I saw him pick up what appeared to be a phone, and I knew right away it was mine. I started to run over to the guy. I didn't want him to just leave with my phone. When he picked it up, he turned instantly and started walking in the other direction. I started yelling at that point, but he was still a good ways away. He didn't stop, of course, and ignored my yelling. Now I started sprinting full speed at the guy. He was walking pretty fast and heading toward the other parking lot. As I kept running, I kept yelling at the guy to stop. He started running too. He sprinted to a car that was parked in the lot and jumped inside. I kept running, but he started his engine and drove away before I could even hope to reach him. I turned and started running back to my car in the other lot. Mikey was about halfway there. I waved him back. He also saw everything that happened and started running back to the lot with me. There was a good chance the man would have to drive past that area to leave. Our lot was more close to the common road. and the other parking lot was kind of a back one. We made it back to my car and jumped inside, just in time to see the man driving past our lot. I started my car and pulled out and onto the road behind the man. We kept a distance back, but followed behind him. I'm not sure if he realized that we were following him or not, but the roads weren't very busy, so it wasn't difficult to keep up with him. We followed for about 10 minutes until we arrived on a quiet residential street. The man parked on the side of the road in front of a house. I parked a little ways back from that. He got out of the car and I got out to confront him. I walked in his direction as he headed towards the house. I yelled at him again, and this time he looked right at me. I said I'd seen him pick up my phone at the park. He turned away and said he didn't know what I was talking about, then told me to leave him alone. He hurried to the front door and went inside. I wasn't going to try and follow him into his house or anything, but I knew he was lying to me. Mikey followed me and we went to the front door after the man went inside. I rang the doorbell. When nobody answered, I began to knock. 10 seconds later, the door opened up, and the guy came out holding a baseball bat. We backed away, and a woman came out of the house as well, also holding a bat. Mikey and I ran back for the car, and they chased us all the way there. I was afraid they were going to try and whack my car or something, so I drove out of there as fast as I could. We were able to get away, and Mikey called the police on his phone and reported what had happened. We parked on the next street over as we waited for the police to get there. About 10 minutes later, they arrived. The police knocked on the guy's door and he denied everything at first, but then he tried to flee. I guess he'd had some run-ins recently, and he didn't want to talk to the officers. I didn't see exactly what happened, but I guess the police ended up coming into the house. The guy and the woman got busted for running a drug operation. They also recovered my cell phone, which I then got back. That was one of the craziest experiences I have ever had. Looking back, I probably shouldn't have followed the guy. Knowing who he is now, he was very dangerous. I don't think he knew I had been following him, because if he had known, he might have tried to do something about it. This is the story of when I lost my phone last year. I have the Find My iPhone app just in case that ever happened, and I certainly needed it. I just know that I came back home one day and realized I didn't have my cell phone. Now, I lived by myself in an apartment, and I didn't have another phone. I had gone quite a few places that day. My job, which is in retail, several other stores. My first thought was to check my car. When it wasn't there, I knew I was screwed. Still, I remembered my Find My iPhone feature and decided to try it out. I went onto my MacBook Pro and looked at the location of my iPhone. I was surprised when it actually seemed to work quite well. It showed my iPhone was located in some park in my city. I found this quite odd. Obviously, I hadn't been there. I had been to some locations that were pretty close by, though. I decided to go to the park and see what was going on. I wrote directions there on the back of a post-it note and then headed out. I was pretty sure I knew how to get there, but not 100%. I drove to the location, which took me about 10 minutes or so. It was very dark out by now. The app led me to a seemingly empty park. There was a parking lot that was small, with only one car parked in the corner. In the park, there were many softball fields, as well as some trees. Instantly, I wondered if my phone was in that lone car that was parked there. It was sort of creepy to think that. I got out and started looking around. I looked all on the ground as well. Luckily, I had a flashlight with me. I was not seeing anything at all, though. I slowly walked around, searching for my phone for the next 15 minutes. The entire time, that one car remained parked in the corner of the lot. After realizing I probably wasn't going to find it, I decided to just go back home and check on my laptop again for the location. If my phone was in the car with whoever that was, maybe they would drive away and the location would change as well. I got back in my vehicle and started driving home. As soon as I left the park though, the car that had been in the lot began following me. Now, I never got a look at who was driving it. It was too dark out. When I left the park, I made a right, which they also did. I took another right, which they did as well. It was pretty clear and easy to tell they were now following me. I wondered why though. I didn't have my phone with me obviously, but I did know my way to the nearest police station. I got back onto a main road and drove down it for a while. After 5 minutes or so, I made another turn. The station was on that road. I knew it because I would drive past it every day to go to work. When I got there, I pulled in. The car behind me obviously did not. I decided to report what happened to the police while I was there. Unfortunately though, they said there was not much they could do. After that, I went home and checked the location of my iPhone again. It was now showing up somewhere else entirely. Shortly after that, it stopped showing up at all. I ended up having to get a new phone. Luckily, I knew exactly what to do when that person started following me. I hope they weren't dangerous, but if they were following me, it's quite possible they were. I'm not sure exactly how or when they got my phone, but I'm glad I avoided a bad situation. Something really bizarre happened to me a couple of years ago. I got a new cell phone and a new number. I'd been needing a new phone for a while, and my previous service was not any good at all. After switching over though, I soon started to get these very strange phone calls and texts as well. The first was a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Obviously, I didn't really recognize any of the new numbers after getting the phone. But when I answered, a man I didn't know spoke and asked me why I had not been returning his calls. I realized he must have the wrong number, and I told him so. For some strange reason though, when I did, he didn't believe me. After that, I just hung up on him. Sometime later, I received a text message from a different number. This text just said something like, "Hey, call me when you get the chance." Once more, I didn't know the number. I replied asking who it was, and they responded with the name of a person I didn't know. I told them that they had the wrong number. This person didn't respond. Over the next week or so, I got at least 10 different text messages and 10 different phone calls as well. Most of them were from different phone numbers, but some were the same. I responded to most of them saying they had the wrong number. I realized that most likely the previous person that had my phone number must not have told their contacts they'd changed it. They must have had a lot of friends or something. I answered another one of these random calls out of curiosity. There was another man I didn't know. I told him he had the wrong number like usual, and that I'd recently gotten this new one. The man on the other end said he didn't understand. I started to explain to him that I'd gotten a new phone and new service, but he just hung up on me. I put up with these random texts and calls for the next few days. After a certain point, I just started ignoring everything. Some people I had already told they had the wrong number, but they continued to message me anyway. It was kind of annoying. I even considered asking to change numbers. I got a text from someone who had already texted me multiple times. They said I needed to cut the crap, and nobody was buying my new number nonsense. They said my life could be made miserable if I didn't start cooperating. When I read that, I was thinking to myself, who on earth had this number before me? I didn't respond. I wasn't really sure what to do. I received another text shortly after, saying they would find me and I couldn't hide forever. By this point, threatening texts began coming from 2 or 3 different numbers. After these sorts of messages went on for a few days, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the police and also went to get a new phone number. I told the cops my whole situation. They told me I should get a new number and they would start an investigation. I did get a new number, and after that I wasn't bothered again. I also never heard anything more about those people. Who were they? Why were they so threatening to whoever was supposed to own this number? I still wonder why I got those texts at all. For a little bit of background, this happened to me in the 1990s. During this time, I was a single woman, living by myself in a house. I worked a job that was in an office downtown. The company that I worked for back then was very large and had different offices in the city and all around the country. One time, there was a big work party that was taking place at a hotel downtown. It was a pretty big deal, actually. Hundreds of people from multiple offices had been invited. When I was there, the first few hours of it were good. I was mingling with some of the other co-workers and my friends from work. Toward the end of the night, though, I was planning on leaving soon. A man approached me as I was standing off kind of to the side. He walked right up and introduced himself. I had seen him around at the party, but I didn't recognize him at all. He must have worked at another office or something. I don't even remember what his name was. He was clearly interested in me, but something about his demeanor did not sit right with me. I couldn't put my finger on it. Something about him just seemed a little bit strange. I also was not interested in him. We talked for a little bit, just basic conversation, really. He told me he worked at another location and asked me how I liked my job and stuff. At the end of the conversation, I said I was planning on heading out, and he asked me if I wanted to share a cab. I told him no thanks and that I'd driven there. At that point, he asked me for my number before I left. This is something really stupid looking back, but back then, when guys would ask me for my number and I wasn't interested, I would give them a wrong number. It was much easier to do back then because not everyone had cell phones. I did have a cell phone myself, but I rarely used it. I would mostly just use my home phone. Cell phones back then could be quite big and bulky. I gave this guy a random wrong number, then I shook his hand and walked away. After that, I stayed at the party for 5 more minutes to say goodbye to my friends. I headed out and left the hotel. I went to my car parked out on the street, then drove home. I lived about 10 minutes away from this area, and my house was right outside of the city. The neighborhood was very busy and the houses were really close together. I went inside my home, when only about a minute later, there was a knock on my front door. By now, it was almost 11 o'clock at night. I knew this was really strange. I walked over to the door and answered it without even checking to see who it was. When I opened the door, I saw that guy from the party. It was a real shock to see him there. I asked him what he was doing. He seemed really angry and told me that he'd called my number. It belonged to a random guy who had no idea who I was. He said he knew I gave him the wrong number and asked me why I did it. There wasn't much I could say. I told him to leave me alone. I wasn't interested, and just because I'd given him a wrong number didn't mean he could follow me home. He said a few more angry things to me and then started marching up to my door. He really looked like he was trying to force his way inside of my house. I tried to slam my door shut. He caught it right before it closed, though, and tried to force his way in. I had to practically throw my whole body against the door to get it shut again. I was finally able to do so and locked it after. He kept on trying to open the door though. He then started pounding on it. I yelled at him that I was going to call the police. At first, he kept trying to find a way in. I didn't think anything was going to stop him. When I went over to the phone though, he finally stopped and walked away. I watched him leave, and after that night, I never saw him again. I was worried he would show up randomly to my work sometime or something like that, but he didn't. That was the last time I ever gave anybody the wrong number. I remember a few years ago, I was going for a leisurely jog in my quiet suburban neighborhood. It was sometime around dusk, I think. I remember I was just minding my own business when suddenly I made eye contact with a naked man standing about 25 feet off the trail. He began furiously masturbating and then started running after me. Of course, my rational response was to run straight out into the middle of a busy road, stop a car, and jump in. The man continued to chase after me still. I didn't even bother to check who it was driving. I begged a complete stranger to drive me home. I called the police, of course, and they found the naked man soon after. He was caught harassing a 13-year-old girl and telling her he was going to impregnate her. I was on a walk through a park with my wife when I was stopped mid-sentence by an intense feeling of dread. It was just a creeping feeling of evil, like nothing I'd ever felt before. Something was behind us, and my wife felt it too. As I looked back, a small blue truck pulled up, and a guy and 2 dogs got out. The guy looked like he hadn't had a haircut in years, and was wearing some grubby clothes. He kept walking around with dogs in tow. As we continued to try and mind our business, the man kept close attention to us, sticking nearby with his dogs. We sat down on a bench, and he began to wander closer to us. We could hear him mumbling things under his breath to himself, including a bunch of political names. We'd quickly had enough and decided to leave. We were about 2 blocks down the road when suddenly he drove past us. A few minutes later, he drove by again the other way. When we got home, we quickly ducked inside and tried to wait out of sight. I peeked out the window and could see him driving around our neighborhood. I'm pretty sure he was out there looking for us. I locked the door and felt pretty uneasy for a while. When I was younger, me and my friend were walking around our block just being dumb kids. That was when we noticed a white van following behind us. Whichever street we went down, it went down as well, and whenever we stopped, it would stop. It had tinted windows, but we could just barely make out a guy inside watching us. Eventually, we jumped the neighbor's fence and decided to hide in their backyard. To our surprise, instead of just driving away, the guy actually got out of the van and knocked on the neighbor's door. It turned out that nobody was home, so after a while of looking around the property, he finally left. We waited for a while to make sure he was really gone and decided to head back home. We saw him again though on the walk home, and he started following us once more. When we got to my house, we told my stepdad. He was quite angry, obviously. He came outside and tried to take down the guy's plates. As soon as he saw our stepdad, though, he drove off in a real hurry. Haven't seen the man again since that day, and it still freaks me out. I was staying at an Airbnb in a neighboring city. This was over 3 years ago now, and although it wasn't completely necessary for me to rent an Airbnb for the night, I had a potentially important job interview in the morning and preferred not to drive 3 hours at dawn and immediately follow that up with an interview. I drove over at around 4 in the afternoon and arrived around 7 o'clock. The house was in a nice neighborhood, and it looked like any normal city street, with various family-sized homes and the like. I parked in the driveway and went inside, almost having my heart stop when a woman emerged from around the corner and introduced herself to me. I was not expecting to see anyone in the house, so I really had to collect myself before even responding. She said she was staying there for a few days in the other half of the home and thought to introduce herself to keep things from being awkward. I had no idea that this was supposed to be a shared rental, but I returned the favor and introduced myself as well. I went to my room and took my phone out of my pocket. I went to the Airbnb app to see if I'd made some kind of mistake, or if this was some kind of shady ripoff. Before I got the chance to really look at all though, the woman came up to my door and started talking to me again. She asked a lot about me and was really trying to keep the small talk going. I tried to signal that I was not really interested in talking, but she didn't seem to notice or care. If I didn't know any better, I'd think she was trying to flirt with me or something. It was a little bit weird considering I'd just arrived there. It was pretty late in the day, so I was obviously tired. After a couple minutes, she went away, and I had the chance to check the app in full. Nowhere on it did it mention multiple rooms for rent. It just said it was the house itself. The pictures, however, did only show a single room, so it didn't really fully answer my question. I sent a text to the owner asking about it. I was already here though and didn't have the time or energy to make any other arrangements at that point. I was just hoping for a partial refund or something. After my bags were sorted in my room, I went to the kitchen to prepare some of the food I'd bought on the way. Less than a minute went by before the woman came out again and met me in the kitchen. It wasn't until now that I'd taken a better look at her. She was older, I'd say mid-40s. She had tired eyes and messy hair. It looked like she'd either just woken up or had been awake for far too long. She started up another conversation, asking me about myself and telling me about her. It became obvious now to me that she was trying to flirt with me or something. I was only in my early 20s, so this was pretty weird. I didn't want to be rude, especially if we'd be staying here together, but I got more and more weirded out as the conversation progressed. She started giving me the strange smile and asking me if I wanted to see her room. She was being really pushy about it. I insisted that she leave me alone so I could eat my food and go to bed. As I continued to deny her, her smile slowly diminished into a frown. She was starting to get upset at me. Just as the atmosphere was getting particularly creepy, my phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at it, and my stomach tightened. The owner sent me a text. Nobody else should be there. They told me to call the police right away if there was anybody inside. I looked back at the woman, who now had an angry look on her face. I heard a door open from down the hallway, followed by heavy footsteps charging through the home. I left everything and sprinted for the door. I saw a man in the corner of my eye running toward me as I left the property. I ran for my car, getting out of there as fast as I could. By the time the authorities arrived, the man and woman were nowhere to be found. What they would have done had I followed the woman into the room is unknown. Thankfully, and somewhat surprisingly, the belongings I'd left behind were still there. That only concerns me even more, though, about what their real intentions were. This happened to me 3 years ago when I'd moved into a small home. It was only a mile from where I was living before, so I wasn't very unfamiliar with this place at all. It was on the side of town I didn't really go to often though, due to it having a record of crimes and just an overall bad reputation. At the time, I wasn't in a good financial place, so I just had to go with the cheaper places I could afford. That just so happened to be this area. The day I moved in, I didn't talk to or really even see anyone else. I just moved my stuff from the U-Haul into my new place. On the second day, I started the unpacking process by moving the boxes and furniture into the rooms they would be in. Once I got to moving my office furniture though, I saw something out my window that really caught my attention. There was a man, young and about 25 years old, just standing in my driveway. I watched as he looked at the house and walked into the yard. He was trying to look into my windows from afar. Getting uncomfortable, I left my own window and went downstairs to confront him. When I opened the door and looked outside though, he was already gone. Not in my yard or driveway, or even on any of the sidewalks. It was like he'd just completely disappeared. I waited to see if he'd come back, but shrugged it off and got back to what I was doing. Yeah, it was weird, but I didn't know what exactly I was supposed to do about that. I got my office set up, then went out to get some lunch before getting back to work on the bedroom by about 8 p.m. I was pretty tired, but I kept on with it for as long as I could manage. Once 10 p.m. rolled around, I was just done for the night. The house was still a mess, but I left it as is, turning off all the lights and climbing into bed. It only took me a few minutes for me to fall asleep. At some point in the night, I woke up. I rolled my head over and looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I rolled back over and tried to close my eyes, but a muffled sound woke me right back up. I lifted my head and listened in again. I could hear a faint sound coming from downstairs. It sounded like something was being dragged across the floor. Still in disbelief, I sat up and listened even more intently. A few seconds later, a similar sound came again. I stood from my bed and walked over to the bedroom door, opening it and looking down the hallway. As soon as I opened the door, all the sounds stopped though. I walked out into the hall and over to the staircase. I went down a few steps and looked over the railing, but I didn't see anything. The house was still completely quiet. When I got to the last step, I flicked on the light. At first, everything looked okay. Nothing missing and nobody inside. But then I noticed something out of place. All the furniture and boxes that were against the walls had been pushed away, and behind them there were several carved out portions in the wall. I felt blood rush from my face as I realized that someone had to have broken into my house and may even still be inside. I ran up to my room and called for help. The house remained quiet the whole time. What's more unsettling is the cops couldn't figure out how the intruder had gotten inside or back outside once they arrived, nor did they figure out why the person broke in. The only idea now is that it looks like they were looking for something in the walls. I don't know what, but there was nothing else to go off of. I think back to that man I saw standing outside my home and wonder if he was the one that had broken in. Even 3 years later though, I still know nothing else about what happened that night. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.